All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our session with Julia. Bear with me one second here. Well, I thought I had it. Hang on one second. That's more like it. All right, now we're in business, folks. Thanks for joining us for Ask the Expert, our weekly webinar series with Julia. Whoops, getting a little ahead of myself there. If for those of you who don't know Julia, she's with New Age Financial Consulting. She does an array of services, including bookkeeping and accounting support, including CFO services for large and small businesses, specializing in unique and complex accounting needs, directed specifically at interior design firms and showrooms. And she also offers comprehensive procurement services for designers and showrooms as well. So as usual, Julia, thank you for doing this for us and hosting today. Before we jump in order to have your questions answered and so Julia can see them, click on that Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar, and that'll pop that window up right there. Go ahead and type in your questions as soon as you have them so we can capture them and answer them as quickly as humanly possible. And with that being said, Julia, I'm going to turn the screen share over to you. Take it away.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Anthony, I'm just going to share my screen. Always confirm that you see the correct screen.
Perfect.
Perfect, thank you. So today's topic, we're going to focus specifically on client and vendor deposits, talking about both of those reports and what those terms mean, and obviously how they relate to Studio. So as I'm sure everybody knows, Studio is accrual basis. And so that means that all of your product sales, all of your product revenue lives in work in progress. And work in progress then consists of two buckets. The client dollars are tied to something called client deposit on the balance sheet, which is here. And then the vendor dollars are tied to something on the balance sheet that's called vendor deposit up here. And so what does that mean, and how does that relate to all of the items in Studio? How often should you be reviewing this information, et cetera? So we've talked a little bit about both of these buckets, especially when it comes to year-end reporting and how you should be reviewing specifically the client deposits. So, and let's actually begin with client deposits because they, in my opinion, they hold a little bit more weight and are more important. They're probably really equally as important as vendor deposits. So here's client deposits on your balance sheet. It is a liability. It lives under the liability section. You cannot adjust client deposits. So what does that mean? So if you go to accounting and you go to journal entry, so journal entry is where you would, for example, make any type of adjustments. You forgot to do something, blah, blah, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. You cannot, if you notice, I'm trying to type in client deposit. I actually cannot adjust client deposit. So there's no way for me to change this number through an adjustment. And that'll be the same for vendor deposits. And that's actually the same for inventory as well. So right, no vendor deposits. I shouldn't be able to change accounts receivable. And the same with accounts payable. And the reason why is because in Studio, this number is coming directly from your item screen. So let's actually open up our item screen. So everything in your item screen, if it begins to, and so we work in our super friends, Mr. and Mrs. Tom Hanks. It's actually not what she goes by. She doesn't go by Mrs. Tom Hanks. Good for her. But so Mr. Tom Hanks is 19th Street, and so he has quite a bit of money with us in our fake studio. And all of these items. So if you notice, there's all these items in here. Let's filter by items on the proposal. So all of these items that have dollars attached to them, they are living in this bucket called client deposit, and we'll actually pull a secondary ledger. And so again, going back to, well, why, if I decide that I'm looking at my balance sheet, and so I pulled this as of March, but we've been using the example of December 2023. So I'm looking at my balance sheet and I notice my client deposit is really high, and I'm doing some review, whether it's with my CPA or with my accountant, and they're like, why do you have $4 million in client deposit, right? You should be able to have an answer for that. and be able to explain to them, A, where this number comes from. And then there's a secondary report that substantiates that. And then the reason why you cannot adjust it out in, let's say, in bulk or via a journal entry with an adjustment is because it's based on all these items. So if you go back into your report section, my favorite section is the legacy. These are my all-time favorites. A lot of these are the old desktop reports. And since I'm a huge desktop fan, they make me really happy. So remember, Anthony, include zeros? No.
Always include.
I know.
No.
Waste of mental capacity. So here's my client deposit report. And so this report is very, very interesting, right? And so if you're not familiar with this, make this part of your routine. Should you be looking at it every day? No. But quarterly, definitely year end. So that's where we had started to dive into this when it came to the year end review. But if you're not if you're not accustomed to looking at it, try to pull it at least on a monthly basis. So you should be checking in on your financials in some capacity. I would say really quarterly. Monthly can really be hard, and I do understand that. And because we're in an accrual basis, meaning, right, our financials are only recognized upon invoicing. Sometimes the accrual financials on a monthly basis are a little bit hard. So here's so how many pages are we? So we're two pages. Here's client deposit. And let's see, did I use the right dates? And if you remember, well, I remember, we have a discrepancy actually, if you notice. Here's client deposit 3.946. And please, there's a Q&A box somewhere in your Zoom taskbar. And so if you have questions as I'm going along, please ask, because a lot of times it's then actually more difficult to circle back on these types of questions when we're looking at two different reports or we're talking about the subledgers and how they all relate to one another. So here's my 3.946 on my balance sheet. Here's my 3.95 on my subledger. I have a mistake. I know we've talked about this before for any of you who visited with us on the weekly topics. This means that something is wrong in my database. I most likely cannot fix it independently. If you're able to understand or at least pinpoint what potentially is causing the mistake, you should then be able to email support to say, hey, I have this mistake. Can you please help me by creating an entry to have this number and this number tied? But in a perfect world, so if you're in your studio, you're logged in and you're like, okay, let me pull these two reports. These two numbers should be the same. And so what this is saying to us on our balance sheet is that this 3.9, let's just round up, this 3.95 is money we've collected from a client. Why is it not revenue? It is not revenue because it's A, not invoiced, meaning it's tied to items in our items screen, but it hasn't been invoiced. Or B, if you notice, it could be potentially part of funds available. So client deposit is made up of two buckets, proposals and funds available. So proposal deposits is money tied to items living on proposals. And I say that it's items living on proposals because perfect process is items should not have client money on them if they're not on a proposal or an invoice. That should be standard process. So could these be just items without an actual proposal number? Yes, but really they shouldn't be. And then funds available is obviously that bucket of money. Let's go to it. Items, let's keep items open. Accounting money in, and our friends 19th Street, they have been sending us oodles of money. And so their funds available is really high, right? It's $871,000. And so this is their retainer account, basically. And so if we go back to the client deposit report, first is the balance sheet. Oh, yes, the client deposit report. So that could be found under legacy. Sorry, somebody's asking a question. I just want to make sure that everyone could follow along. So under reports, so actually let's close this tab and go into a new tab. So under reports, open and right link, second link. What? I'm losing my words. New tab, new tab. I love legacy reports, right? So for the most part, this is, and that's, I mean, but in terms of financial reports, this is my favorite place. I always go to this. This is a layout that, again, I'm personally familiar with. And so in the fourth column, there's a report called the 50/40 client deposit. And so this report lets you understand what's in this big bucket, 3.95. And so, right, because I look at my balance sheet and I'm like, oh my gosh, I send this to my CPA and he's like, why do you have $3.95 million in client deposit? And my answer is, oh my gosh, I have no idea. So then go to the client deposit subledger, and this report spits out just like this. And so it has a list of all of your clients and these 5 columns. Let's actually just take a step back and discuss these 5 columns. And so, one more thing. So these columns here actually tie to not only this screen, right? So I filtered by 19th Street, funds received, proposals, invoices, funds available, but they also tie. If you go to 19th Street in your client ID and you go to codes, there's the same buckets of money here. But in summary, right, if you wouldn't necessarily know, I mean, I never know for sure, in terms of how much have clients paid me on proposals and what's that total across the board. So this is that report. So it really allows you to understand, okay, Mr. Tom Hanks, he has sent us $70,000. And all of that is actually applied to items. And those items could potentially just be work in progress, right? They're not installed yet. They are at a receiving warehouse. They're damaged. They're just work in progress. They're in transit and they're not finalized. And so therefore they haven't been invoiced. And when they are invoiced, this bucket of money moves to this bucket of money. It relieves proposal deposits and transfers over to invoices, and this revenue, all this revenue and all of this cost of sales are recognized. The second bucket of money that makes up client deposit is this funds available right here. And so this, again, this is Tom Hanks. And so he has sent us $900,000 of money throughout the course of several years of working together. And this $900,000 literally is in funds available. So back in the old desktop days, this was always called client deposit. I'm sure, again, if anyone's noticed, I consistently call funds available client deposit. That's just what it was referred to in the old, in the original studio desktop. And so this means that he has $871,000 available, right? And so again, you could see it in a couple of different places, right here, and money in, right here. And so we could use that at any point in time to apply it to items. The reason client deposit is negative, I said negative, a liability, meaning a credit, it is negative, but it's a credit because at any point in time, in theory, like right from a financial standpoint, from a financial statement standpoint, these 2 buckets of money, especially funds available, could really go back to the client. Now, granted, your contract should protect you from that. And it should say that, right, potentially items, for example, for proposal deposits are non-refundable, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you won't be giving them back all of their funds available, right? All contracts are written differently. But that is why it's showing up as a liability here on your financial statement. So this report breaks that down for you. From here, you should be able to evaluate and understand the accuracy of these 2 buckets. So does Tom Hanks really have $70,000 worth of items and dollars of work in progress? Is that true? Or is his entire project closed out? Everything closed, everything's installed. It's been actually installed last year, and why this is $70,000, nobody is sure. If that is the case, that means you do need to recognize this revenue. One of the easiest ways to do that, so if you're looking at this report and you're like, shoot, this project was installed, I didn't even realize they had all this money in proposal deposits. Let me go in an invoice. So go to your item screen. Let's actually leave this one open. So go to your item screen, and we're in 19th Street, and change your view to item list. And I did it just a few minutes ago, but I don't know if anybody noticed. And so when I change my view to item list, I utilize these column headers as filters. So I will say, well, show me any items on an invoice at the top. So here are my invoiced items. Then I'll say, show me any items on a proposal, whoops, and not on an invoice. Throw my invoices to the bottom. So then I'm very quickly able to see all of my items on proposals without an invoice. There we go. At the top. And so I could invoice easily from here. And so I change back to item details. And then from this screen, I'm able to decide, okay, should I put these items on an invoice or should I not? Another easy way to do that, so again, if you notice that you have client deposit money that proposal deposits that shouldn't exist, is go back to your report screen, go to all reports and filter by 2010-03. Filter by 19th Street. And an easy way again is to say, show me invoices blank. So I want to see any item with an invoice number that is blank. So from here, and you could actually even do it client payment. So invoice is blank and client payment is not blank, right? So I want something in that payment column. Oops, not email, PDF. And here are all the items that potentially have proposal deposits attached to them, right? And it's quite a bit. It's actually 3 pages. And I want to understand what's going on in here, right? So this, for example, looks like it was a chair and then a refund or a returned. And so in theory, right, you could just click these 2 items, invoice, recognize the revenue and the cost of sales and move on. But this is another really easy way to understand, again, where am I in terms of the project management of these items and how does that relate to my client deposit? We're actually going to leave this report open because we would do a similar exercise with the vendor side. So that's something client deposit is showing me. So let's go back to client deposit. So something like this, right? So James here has $17 of proposal deposits and 10 cents in funds available. But if this, again, if this project is over, this needs to be cleaned up. This needs to be invoiced, and this 10 cents needs to be moved out of funds available. You could move it to revenue, or you could apply it to obviously open invoices, or open items. But you have to get rid of both this column and this column need to be 0 for you to be able to close out a project. So if you scroll all the way down, we see as of today, we have $970,000 worth of product, of dollars on product items. And I say product because in theory, right, best practice is your items are product only and all of your fees are done through time billing. Now that isn't always the case, right? So there are definitely some users who are creating time billing entries in items. But again, in terms of the modules in Studio and best practices, that's not the I would say the way the software was built out, right? Anything having to do with design fees should be in time billing. And because time billing is only able to be invoiced, you wouldn't have anything related to time and proposals in this column because all of the time should be directly in invoices and invoice payments. So hopefully that's also, self-explanatory. So that's why I keep saying proposals, right? Tied to items, which is tied to product. And so then regarding something like this for Mr. Tom Hanks, right, this 870,000, this is a project that's still in the works. And I've been taking money in and out of funds available as I continue working on the project. Something else actually to consider, and so this is a mistake, but I'm sure it was done I'm probably the one who did it, but for an example. So your client deposit should literally be related to clients. You should not have any dollars in here related to vendors. If you do, typically that means that there was a posting mistake. So actually, we could go to First Dibs as an example. So I'm looking through this list, right, because I'm verifying my information. My CPA asked me to just make sure that the all 3.95, is the correct number. And so I noticed that First Dibs is in here and they have funds available. So right, this is saying that they paid us $655,000, which is quite a bit of money. And not only that, but they have $655,000 in funds available. And that sounds wrong to me, right? I know that they don't have any money in funds available. Forget that the dollar value is extremely high. But what that means is, so let's actually go to money in, let's go to First Dibs. And so remember, vendors in here, you can't filter by vendors in this particular box, in this dropdown. So to find a vendor in the money in screen, you need to go to your magnifying glass, you need to go to First Dibs, you need to change your client type to vendor, and then it pops up, and then you need to select the select checkbox, and then it'll be added into your money in screen. So an additional step in there. So if you're in this screen, and for example, you received a commission check from First Dibs, and let's actually pretend that's what this 654 was. Or actually, we got a new check from First Dibs. We've been really, and I don't think First Dibs does that. But they sent us a new check and it's $55,000 and it's just a commission check. And I'm trying to get it into my bank account. I want to see it in my general ledger. I deposited it into Bank of America and my check number is 98765. And so if you notice, my payment method always defaults to receive and apply. And that is the default payment method in the money in screen. That's usually the most utilized payment method. So that's why it defaults here. But this little tiny error here, which can be difficult to read sometimes, but it's telling me I can't utilize this payment method because this bucket here doesn't match the items. Oh, okay, great, no problem. I'll just change it to receive client payment. So as soon, and this maybe isn't necessarily intuitive, but as soon as I put receive client payment, this is automatically increasing my cash account, which is part of my goal. But the other part is it's increasing my client deposit. So we're just going to post this anyway. So if you notice, this went up to $709,000. But if I'm doing anything in the money in screen that has to do with vendors, I should always, always, always be using this receive miscellaneous payment button or drop down. So once I go to receive miscellaneous payment, and let's say I now have another check from them and it's $72,500 and it's check number 12345. As soon as I change the payment method, a couple things happen. A, my income account opens up, right? So this is where I would then tell the system, don't hit my client deposit account. The debit and the credit go here, cash and credit to income here. And if you notice, when you're using receive miscellaneous payment, this funds available will not change. That's actually how you know that you most likely did it correctly. So I'm going to post this one. And if you notice 709 stayed as 709. Let's go to our general ledger screen, just so we could look to see what that looks like. So we're in our GL. Let's go to Bank of America. Oh, our two receipts are here. So if you notice, right, so here's my one that I posted it incorrectly. Bank of America, 55,000 and client deposit. And then again, Bank of America and commission. And I'm assuming this is revenue, but I don't know offhand if this is revenue or expense. And here's my 72.5. So if this is here, most likely that means that you, instead of doing receive miscellaneous payment, you accidentally did receive payment and increased funds available instead of increasing your cash account. Instead of increasing your revenue account, excuse me, your cash account did go up, your revenue account did not. And so you can fix this. You're going to have to fix it through the money in screen. Which actually we could do. Well, we should probably get it out of funds available anyway. In my fake land, where First Dibs sends me $700,000. So I'm actually going to do a receive client payment and I'm going to do a negative, and I know to, let's see, so I'm going to do a 709,321. It would be easiest for me to have this be client deposit, but I can't do that. It won't let me. No, sometimes I do still try. So typically in a situation like this, remember, you can't adjust client deposit, right? Because it's tied to either items, or especially in this situation, right? It's tied to the vendor ID, which is really being treated as a client because of the client deposit. So I would actually move it in and out of suspense. So I don't need to reverse the cash side. I really did get this money, right? So my cash, I'm trying to move my report back. My cash really did go up, the 709,321, but my client deposit didn't. So I want to get it out of here, and I want to move it over into revenue. So I could do that by utilizing this suspense account. So again, for those of you not familiar, suspense lives on your balance sheet. It's right here. It is an asset account. It does come preset with the system. So everybody has an account called suspense. You may have never known that. You may not be using it, but it is basically in the accounting world used, I would say, as a holding place, maybe as a holding place. So I use it all the time, actually, when I'm trying to move money, whether I'm trying to move money from items, from purchase orders, between clients, between projects. et cetera, et cetera. So I'm using it to have both a debit and a credit and to have it always net zero. And so if you notice on this particular balance sheet, suspense is not zero, and that means that there's a problem. And so really you need to go find it and you need to fix it. But suspense is a great tool for offsetting an equal corresponding debit and a credit. So in this situation, we're going to move this money. We're actually going to use my initials. It's a great way for anyone then to be able to see, oh my gosh, what happened? And so I'm going to give it a description. And I'm going to copy my check number. And so because I changed my cash account to suspense, and this number here negative is the negative 709,321, but I'm taking it out of here. Right, so this is now zero. So I fixed my client deposit, but if you notice, I created a suspense problem. So I now have a credit in suspense. And so to fix that, right, and again, I know to do this, but I'm sure there's some really great help articles about it as well. So I then am going to go to my journal entry, because remember, I can't use a journal entry to do anything with client deposit, but I am able to do something with suspense. So when I'm in suspense, I'm going to use the same check number for my corresponding debit, because that'll always help me identify the reference number, right? So this field here, this check number, I'm particular about. That would be a good way to say it. I'm very particular about. I like everything to be very methodical and very intuitive for anyone that looks in the database to understand A, what was happening, and B, be able to tie it together. So if I have one set of debit and credit here, and so here's the other side with this check number, and then I'm able to utilize a similar check number on a corresponding entry. So somebody, especially with an accounting background, could look and be like, oh, I see what was happening. I see the corresponding debit and credit. So anyway, that's the reason why I do that. And I'm actually going to utilize my same description. So again, just everything stays uniform. Here's my 709,321. One was negative, so this one is positive, and I actually want to copy the same number again. And I am moving it from suspense, and remember, it was in client deposit, but really needed to be in commission revenue. We're assuming this is revenue, not expenses. We could fix that at another time. This needs to be negative. And so I'm going to just utilize today's date, right? This isn't impacting a tax return. Let's pretend I filed 2023, even though it was incorrect. That happens. And so I post it. And so I like to double check a couple things. And I do typically always do this if I'm utilizing something like suspense. So if you notice back in my GL, I'm back in suspense here. And so here's my debit and here's my credit. So I did a couple of things, right? I fixed my, oh, here's my report. It's finally, it was like stuck. Well, actually, let's rerun this. So because I was looking now at the client deposit detail and I noticed, right, that I'm overstated, I corrected something. I was able to relieve client deposit of now 700,000. And I recognize that as revenue because it really was. First Dibs sent me this giant commission check and it was incorrectly recorded. And so I was able to fix that. Hold on, let me get rid of my stupid zeros. PDF. And so if you notice, First Dibs is now gone and my balance went down. It is now 3.3 as well. So that is a great example of actually why this is a report that you should be reviewing. This is also something I review when I'm closing out a job too. So if I'm closing out, and 19th Street isn't a good example, but we could look at James Lindington. When I go into the steps of closing out a project, and we can definitely do a separate webinar on it, this isn't one of the reports I pull to understand that, again, all of my subledgers are correct. And they'll remember, I'm checking this in multiple places, right? So for James, whose poor name I can't pronounce. It's probably inactive. Hold on, let's go find him. But he was made inactive with dollars in his client deposit. Maybe I don't know how to spell. Oh, it's not at all. Hold on. It's a common problem. Oh, he is active. Oops. Okay, hold on. Okay. So I'm always looking at it here, as we talked about earlier, but I'm also looking at this report here as well. And so So hopefully that's a relatively good overview as to the client deposit report, how it relates to the subledgers, how it relates to your items. And then on the flip side of that report, we have something called vendor deposits. And it ties very, very closely to client deposit. And so we're back on our balance sheet. Here's our client deposit. This is the old number. Remember, we did adjust it. And here's our vendor deposits. $322,000. And so where is this number coming from? So remember, we can't adjust it, right? There's nothing that we could do to adjust it through like a bulk entry or any type of entry. Vendor deposits is tied to items. And so a good way to see that is, let's go back to our reports. Let's go back to all, so reports and legacy, and let's go to vendor deposit. And so let's just take a look at the totals. I wonder if my subledgers match, because remember, my client deposit subledgers don't match. Okay, I don't think they match at all, so they're actually quite off, which is again a separate and apart issue. This was 322, but I believe our balance sheet was, my balance sheet is stuck. What's it doing? Oh, it is 322. I'm sorry, I was looking at this number. So 322, 316, and here's my balance sheet, 322. Oh, I tie exactly. Oh, that's a good time. 322, 316, and 322, 316. And so this is actually explaining, so this report here. So this is explaining to you that all of these vendors, and so this is the summary report, but these vendors, for example, have dollars tied to the item, and I'm going to say on the purchase order, because remember, right, you shouldn't have money to a vendor tied to an item without a purchase order. And so these vendors all have purchase orders, and the purchase orders have been paid, but on the client side, right, that item in itself hasn't been invoiced. So if it hasn't been invoiced, this vendor deposit is basically, from a financial standpoint, a prepayment to the vendor. We paid the vendor, but we prepaid the vendor. And now that may not necessarily be true in terms of the product may have already been worked on, maybe delivered even, maybe it's at a receiver. But when it comes to the accrual process, this vendor deposit, it hasn't been relieved and it's living in work in progress. And so another report to look at when you're looking at vendor deposits is your work in progress report. And so let's look at, hold on. Let's look at a couple of things. Let's get rid of this. Let's assume we're done with client deposit for right now, sorry. Let's look at, let's go back to all reports and see what other vendor, but maybe that's the same one. Same report, okay. If you go to reports and all, another great report to utilize in conjunction, right? And so this is where if you're closing, either you're doing year end or you're closing out a project and you're saying, oh, I'm going to start with my client deposit, then I'm going to look at vendor deposit, and then I'm going to look at work in progress. So let's regroup. Working vendor deposits is dollars tied to, so vendor dollars. So excuse me, not client dollars, right? So vendor deposit is vendor dollars tied to items living on purchase orders that haven't been invoiced. Now, if you're then from that point trying to understand, well, how does that relate to each client? The best report to look at is one of these four. I personally like this one. Work in progress by client. And so from here, I'm going to, I don't know what's in 19th Street. I don't actually think that they have. Oh, they do. Okay. So I filtered this by 19th Street. And so work in progress is a little bit different from vendor deposit, where work in progress is generated by the purchase order. And so this is where, again, processes in Studio are very, very critical. An item should never have vendor dollars without an order. So that's one. And then a work in progress report may have orders on here, meaning an open purchase order that doesn't have any client money on it. But in Studio, the work in progress trigger is a purchase order, because that's what that means, right? So if we talk about our item workflow, and what does that item life cycle look from beginning to end? An item goes into Studio, it goes on to a proposal is paid. Once a proposal is paid, then we start the order process. So at that point in time, our WIP begins as soon as we click this button, right? As soon as we generate an order, work in progress starts. And we may wind up having to void orders because an order is incorrect or rejection or damage or long lead time, etc. But as soon as an order exists, this report or this process begins. And so work in progress may have orders on here that are open, meaning not paid, and it may have orders on here that are paid, meaning not open, but they still live on this report because they haven't been invoiced. So let's look at this. Let's look at the screen. So here we are. This is really old. Oh, look, First Dibs. So here's First Dibs. That's a bad example. Those are returns. There's another return and it's a 0. Here's a non-billable vase from 2022. So we generated this order 285, September 2022. It is non-billable. So if you notice, the selling price is 0. The purchase cost is 2,500 and the vendor balance is vendor payment is 2,500, and there's actually no vendor balance. But what happened in this particular item situation, and I can see it already, is so this is non-billable. So that explains to me right off the bat why the selling price is 0, but that's very helpful. I don't like that the non is capital, but the billable is not. So it should be more uniform, or it should just say NB. It's a really great shortcut for non-billable too. And I would say a lot of our firms prefer that. I think it just stands out a little bit less on reports. But so this is very indicative to me, right? So non-billable, so it's 0, and the vendor has actually been paid. But why is this living on work in progress? And then B, it is in my vendor deposit total. And so why is it living in there? And the answer to that is because it was never invoiced. And even if an item, I think it was 285, so 200, 285. Even if an item, this is actually a common question. So this is that item. So there's no proposal, there's no selling side. The item tells me it's non-billable. Let's fix our non-billable. But to relieve the work in progress and to relieve the vendor deposit, I need to invoice this. Without invoicing this item will never be recognized as cost of sales. And I want it to be, right? This was an additional cost to the business. And this was actually a loss, right? If I'm looking at just this one item for my whole year or my whole month or my day or my week, this would be a loss on my income statement. So let's actually create an invoice. And let's look in my journal entry screen, or my general ledger screen, excuse me, what this looks like. So don't look at that. So here we are. All these entries. Oh, so I could do 200 to 8. And so if you notice, even though I created an invoice, right, because here's an invoice number, it's now tied to it, there's no revenue. And I created an accounts payable, which I had to do. And if you notice, right, my vendor deposit, this is actually the credit of the vendor deposit being relieved. But I need to do this final step. This is a critical function. And so this report is really, really helpful in understanding what is still considered work in progress and potentially in vendor deposit per project. So again, if this is not something you're used to, definitely look at it for sure at the end of the year, but also when you're closing out projects. I don't know if I would look at this quarterly. I don't know, to me, if that's like not even intuitive, but if that's informative enough. I would rather do it per project. So if I know that 19th Street is coming to an end, I'm going to sit down and pull my client deposit as related to 19th Street, and I'm going to pull my work in progress to see, oh, well, let's see what's actually going on in terms of all of the purchase orders in 19th Street. And some of these orders, so let's look. Oh, there's no balances. Oh, here's one, but it's new. So this French chair for First Dibs that was just generated a couple of weeks ago, this vendor was never paid. And in this situation, I'm just using this because it's the only full balance open. If I'm no longer moving forward with this French chair, I think it was 486. Let's see, the client hasn't paid for it. Oh, the client did pay for it. Well, this is our $900,000 client deposit client. So this French chair, I'm gonna put long lead time, probably, and I wanted to put it in capital. Rejected. How about that? It's probably better terms. So they wound up rejecting it. And because they wound up rejecting it, I wound up not, even though I generated the order from First Dibs, I was able to understand from the vendor pretty quickly that the lead time was too long. I communicated that to the client. And they said, you know what, forget it. Let's just do something else. Okay, great. So I go in here. I like to utilize my colors. I don't know what the heck is in here. Red. Oh, attention. Yes. So this is now an attention item. I need to do something with it. Something's up. I helped myself in the top line description. It's rejected. And I'm going to actually, hold on, save and close. Now the client did pay for it, and that's okay. I'll deal with that later. Actually, I'm going to deal with it now. Sorry. Codes, change that to 0. I'm going to throw this back into client deposit for them. Let me zero everything out. They're very easy in terms of client deposit. I move money in and out of there pretty regularly. I do send them a report on that from time to time, depending. So I'm going to change my payment method, apply payment to item from funds available. Where did my French chair go? Here it is. I'm going to move this, right, as a negative from this specific item back to client deposit. I always use my abbreviation here. And if you notice, my 871 is going to jump to 874. Oh, 874.9, great. And then I'm not quite done though, because even though let's refresh. I fixed the selling side, I didn't fix the purchase side. And so, right, this particular item may not necessarily stand out to you, right? So the selling side is 0. We don't have any money on it. We don't have money on either side, payment or vendor or client. But if I go back and run a work in progress, this is still going to exist. And that's because the work in progress report, which is slightly different than the vendor deposit, is triggered by this order. And so because that order still exists on the item, the system is prompting you or prompting us to say, you have a work in progress, you have an item on an order and it needs to be dealt with. So if I go into that item and I just void the order, remember, it doesn't have any payments on it, so I'm not doing anything that I shouldn't be. And then I voided the order. And so where did my French chair go? French chair. Who knows if I spelled that right? I voided the order. On the report now, the French chair goes away. It's gone. So A, it's no longer part of work in progress. B, it was never part of vendor deposit because I didn't pay for it. And then in my item screen, I just like to do all the right things. So I'm going to 0 at the vendor side. And I'm actually going to make this item inactive. I'm not going to delete it because there was a payment on the item at one point in time. So I actually won't be able to. Studio will stop me. It'll say you cannot delete this item. There's general ledger transactions tied to it. And I actually don't really want to delete it, right? I mean, I want this history. I want to be able to understand, well, wait a minute. Where did this $3,300 go? Oh, on 2/7, it went here. On 2/21, there was more activity. And then on 3/27, I threw all of this back into client deposit. So I zeroed that out. I personally like to do that. I'm keeping it red, but I'm going to make it inactive. So I'm going to have it fall off of my immediate radar. So is this the old one? Yes. So remember, when you're working on, actually, hold that thought. So work in progress, again, in my opinion, I definitely like to utilize it either towards the end of a project or towards the end of a calendar, a calendar year, tax year. In terms of maintaining and managing purchase orders actively, I would always utilize the 2010 report, but that's my personal preference. That's my workflow. That's how I like to look at the information. And then I would then utilize the 2010 report and I would customize it for lots of really different reasons. But if I was trying to understand, okay, like we just ran that one somewhere in this mix. We ran this report to show me items with proposals with client payments, but you could run the same report. And so I closed that one out to say, well, show me items. So project management, right? So like, how do you do this at the office? Everybody's going to be a little bit different. So show me items, client payment is not blank, but order is blank, right? Because I actually want those attention items. I want to understand, oh my gosh, where did clients pay me? But I didn't place an order yet. And I also know that my own office workflow, that my system, I'm really good about anytime I place an actual order with a vendor, whether it be online through Pottery Barn or through a rep for a Cravat custom chair order, I am good about clicking my order button. So if I'm good about clicking my order button, that then generates my work in progress, this report can be really helpful to me. Oh, Laura, that's a really great question. I will get to that. Yes. I will then utilize this report because the work in progress report is a great snapshot, and it definitely allows you to sort of see some problem items, but to me, it's not all encompassing. So I really like the 2010 report because I find it to be all encompassing and a more useful tool in terms of management, right? So I would then utilize this report to say, well, shoot, why do I have, let's find an item, I don't know. These look real in our fake database, and sometimes it's so hard. It's like, what's a good example? Living room budget. Oh, I did this for a budget example. I don't need this anymore. I'm done with my living room. I don't need a budget line item anymore. I'm actually going to go in and remove it off of this proposal, and I'm going to make it inactive because I don't want it to clutter a report, right? So work in progress is only going to show you purchase orders, where as opposed to a report like this with the correct filters is going to show you obviously anything in those filter parameters. And then from there, and so for example, I would have filtered off time billing. So you could go into, so this is all in room time billing, and I'm going to say room is not in time billing. I don't want to see anything in relation to time billing. I know my time billing is all fees, and I know I'm not looking to understand where I am with fees. My test night, like this is, again, for me, this would be a great example to say, well, I don't know what's going on in here, but let me invoice these, right? Because it's 0-0. I'm not owed anything I don't owe anything to First Dibs, and I'm not owed a credit from them. I would zero out the purchase cost on both of these and invoice this and get it off my report, right? So again, that's why I personally like the 2010 report, because it allows me to, even though I'm looking for specific sets of information, I'm able to then utilize it a little bit more holistically. Laura had a really great question. So you mentioned you occasionally give your clients a report showing funds available. What report is that? So go back to reports, go to all. I love the payment application report. Now I will warn you, it can be confusing. And so sometimes, so if I just go to, again, 19th Street is there's a couple of us in this database. I don't know, Anthony, if you log into here, but we've read I know some of Studio does. So it's always really funny to see what other people do. I'm like, oh, I wonder what so-and-so did. What kind of examples are they using? But 19th Street is my own test, a project that I usually always resort to. So I filtered by 19th Street in terms of payment application. And it's a lot of information, and it'll tell you anytime you applied, anytime you did anything with client money. And that's meaning literally anything, $67, $1, a penny. You moved it from the dining room to the powder room to the study, back and forth because you made a mistake. I mean, this report could definitely be extensive. So I would absolutely send this, especially if you're transparent with clients and they know that there's money being moved in and out of items and refunds and returns. This is actually a really great report to be able to send to them, to say, here's how all of your money's been applied. And so here are all the dollars received, right? So then a client could take this report and be able to compare it with all the payments they've sent to you, right? As a really great comparison and as a really good starting point in terms of any type of, audit or forensic accounting, or even like total project spend, etc. This report though too, so if you run, for example, the client total balance or the client, no, I would say the client total balance, this number right, should match your client total balance, excluding your deposit balance here, 874. So again, before you send a report like this, always double check your math, always double check the places where information is populating for sure. Because if you have hidden items with payments on them, that'll skew reports, right? And so you really want to be mindful of that. So this number should reflect how much they've paid you. So you could absolutely send a report like this for them to be able to see, oh, well, how much money is in my deposit balance? The other thing too, you could do if somebody says to you, well, let's say this client knows they have hundreds of thousands of dollars and they say, well, what does that mean? Why is that there? Like, what's that made up of? A great way then to also filter off straightforward payments, meaning if you sent a client a proposal 100, and they paid you $1.2 million on a giant proposal, and it was applied to that proposal, right, without any additional money being left over, this receive and apply payment, I want to use my word, payment method, is actually pretty clean, right? So I actually then filter off these two, receive miscellaneous and receive and apply, and I use these two to then be able to send to a client, or I put this in Excel sometimes too, and say, Mr. and Mrs. Tom Hanks, here's all of your ins and outs in terms of overpayments and underpayments, and anytime we've moved money, and then again, here's your deposit balance. So I'm not showing them the straightforward payments that they made on either proposals or invoices. I'm just showing them all of the money movement. But hopefully that's a good starting point for you. So keep these two for sure in mind. And I like the date one. There is an item one too, and it's interesting. I find a lot of our designers prefer the payment application by item. If you notice, there was two, item and date. I like the date one, but that's, I think, accounting brain versus interiors brain, right? You're looking at this more by item. I'm looking at it always more by date and by totals. So just something to keep in mind. But really, yeah, definitely, yes, really great question. We're pretty much at the top of the hour, so if there are not any more specific questions, hopefully that was really helpful to everyone. I know that was a lot of information.
It was, but always valuable and definitely useful. Bear with me 1 second here. I thought I had my contacts. There we go. That's what
I think I need to stop sharing. Okay, I stopped sharing.
it's perfect timing. All right, there we go. So now that we got all the questions out of the way, if you want to get in touch with Julia, here's her email address, phone number, and website, newagefinancialconsulting.com. If by chance you need to reach out to Studio Designer support, you can email us at support@studiodesigner.com, or click on that little chat bubble on your dashboard in Studio Designer, and you can chat with our new and improved AI chatbot or a real person.
Sorry.
If the multiples that are provided aren't efficient enough. But other than that, by all means, reach out to either of us if you need any extra help. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us today, and we'll catch you next week. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.